So if you're like me, you grew up playing 4X grand strategy games. 4X games are games that go beyond just your normal RTS, something like Iron Harvest or Command and Conquer, or even something like Age of Empires, where it's trying to simulate in a very abstract way what it's like to run a country or a civilization or even a species. The idea being that things like the economy, science, diplomacy, culture, religion are as important, if not more important, than just pure force of arms. And obviously, the gold standard of this was the Sid Meier franchise, which started off with Civilization. I remember growing up, I got whatever the special Gold Age collector's edition of Civilization 2 was, that came with a billion different scenarios for like H.G. Wells in World War II and World War One. And I loved Civilization 2. And then there was Alpha Centauri, which was the sci-fi version of Civilization. And then I kind of moved on to Paradox 4X games, Galactic Civilization, one of my all-time favorite games, Sims of the Solar Empire. But I find that things have really kind of declined in that sphere. Not a lot has really been coming out recently. Paradox just keeps pumping out DLC for their existing products. I guess they released Crusader Kings 3, but I haven't really tried it yet. We've been on Civilization 6 for like 5 years now, and they just keep pumping out horrible DLC Civilization pack over horrible DLC Civilization pack. So there's not really been a lot of development in the field. I guess there's been a bunch of sci-fi ones, but most of those I just haven't really liked that much. I'm looking for something a little simpler, a little more traditional. And so this popped up in my Steam feed, and I've been seeing a lot of ads for this everywhere. And it's called Humankind. And I'm like, this sounds horrible. Just from the name alone is super, super cringy. They couldn't even call it humanity. They didn't want to call it mankind because that's sexist. They didn't want to call it humanity because that would have made too much sense. We have to call it humankind, which is, I've always felt a very unpoetic, bad-sounding phrase, but I decided to give it a shot. Now, as with a lot of modern games, I first decided to obtain a copy. That is, get a copy without paying for it, just to kind of test it out, to maybe play a few games. And what I'll normally do is I'll do that, and if I like it, I'll go ahead and buy it. Either now or later on when it's on sale. So I obtained a copy of it, I popped in Humankind, and I gotta say it's not bad. I'd call it like 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. Or maybe even 2 steps forward, 1 step back, if I'm being generous. I have to give them credit for trying really hard to put a new spin on a old concept, while still maintaining a lot of the core gameplay elements from something like Civ 5 or Civ 6. But like I said, really trying to innovate, trying to do something a bit different, something a bit new. So I'll give them a lot of credit for that. There was some real creative thought that went into this. The issue is, I feel like they didn't maybe play test this enough. They didn't balance it really properly. And there are kind of some glaring issues with it that, to me, kind of undermine it. But I think overall, if you're someone who, and we'll go into the mechanics and stuff, likes 4X games and can get past how cringy the title is, I'd probably actually recommend this one. I put quite a few hours into it, and I find it overall an enjoyable experience and a rewarding one where every time I play the game, I'm better at it. And it's one of the few 4X games where I actually will put the difficulty up to try to actively compete against the AI. So before we get into the gameplay, let's just talk a bit about how it functions. So you have your avatar. That was my best attempt at creating one. Most of the avatars look absolutely atrocious. Like, look at that. That looks, ugh. This one's the worst. And then most of them look terrible. I don't like the character art style in this. I think it looks atrocious. And as you go through the eras, they change clothes, but because, and we'll get into this, you can pick any civilization in any era, you get people just wearing clothing that really doesn't suit them at all. So that is that. Now, what would a Civilization game be without a robust new game maker? So here's kind of one of the first problems. And I'm not sure if anyone notices something here. There's a distinct lack of any sort of custom map. There's no custom maps. I mean, look at it. There's absolutely no custom maps that come bundled with the game. Maybe people will release them as mods, but there's no map of Earth. There's no map of like Europe or Africa or the Middle East or South America or some sort of like balanced tournament map or anything. There's no preset maps, which to me, if you're going to make a historical strategy game, that is a massive L right there. That's a massive problem. The rest of it is more or less what you'd expect. There's no option to determine the number of resources, which is something I greatly enjoy in Civilization games, like where you do legendary start, and you can really kind of customize the game. And what I find is that the number of resources you get, I think, is based on either tiny or small. So if you have a bigger map, it just spawns the same number of resources spread out over a larger area. And apparently that was a design choice because they were trying to force you to fight resource wars or to buy resources from other countries. And I mean, that's fine, but kind of my issue is if you're playing a science faction, especially towards the end game where there's uranium, oil, aluminum, a bunch of different things that are necessary to do end game projects like the space race, you're probably pretty far ahead of the other civilizations in terms of science. So you'll see these resources sitting in their territory and they won't exploit them and you can't pay for the right to exploit them. So like my last game, I had allies that I'd had for most of the game who had large amounts of uranium, but I had no way of buying it because I was so far ahead of them in terms of technology. And it's like, what am I supposed to do? Attack my ally so I can take like one province that has uranium in it? It just seems a little silly to me. I will say one cool thing that I don't recall in Civilization is New World. So you can set it up so that there will be a large uninhabited continent that you can race for once you start to get the ability to build long-range ships, which is not as useful as it seems, but yeah. So you have that. Then you have the difficulty settings. Now, another interesting thing they introduce is peaceful mode. And under peaceful mode, if you turn it on, different empires will not attack each other. So if you want to try out a higher difficulty or you want to try out your strategies or something like that, that's kind of cool. If you're someone who doesn't really like the warfare aspects of it, then that's kind of an interesting thing to add in. I'm not sure if some of the versions of Civ have that or not. So when you get into the game itself, you start in the Paleolithic times without any cities, and you kind of explore the map, which I think is kind of a cool phase. You get more scouts. I find it's best to wait a while before you era up, and you try to get cities and stuff like that, because you want to get as many scouts as possible, because goodie boxes or whatever will respawn in Fog of War areas. So you can get a large advantage early game if you have a whole bunch of scouts. So it's good to get a bunch of those before you era up and start settling, which is kind of interesting. One of the problems with that, though, is it makes starting position a lot more important than in a lot of the Civ games. So if you are stuck in an area where you don't get lucky and you don't get things that goodie boxes that give you additional scouts, you can kind of be fucked in the early game. By the way, this loading screen is epic cringe. Why is there a female French revolutionary with dyed blue hair? Maybe that's the... I don't know. It's just super cringy. So there's that aspect to it, which once again is kind of interesting. I appreciate that they tried to do something different. Now, the load times in this game are not good, as you can tell from this. I have a very good computer, but this is taking forever to load. So this was a game I was playing that I pretty much finished. So this is kind of similar to, I guess, Civ 6 in a couple ways. So how the game works is your cities will have districts. They're pretty straightforward. You have farmer, market, science, makers, or industrial production, that sort of thing. And they'll provide an inherent amount of production from that particular resource. Like, for instance, I'm going to go to a maker's quarter that provides me with 55 industrial production. Okay, so kind of similar to Civ 6. Also, it provides jobs which your population will fulfill to produce the respective resource. Pretty straightforward. Now, every civilization, we'll get into civilization choice, gets one exclusive district in each era, and they will carry on. So if you're Korea, or maybe that's not a good example, if you're Egypt in the first age and you build a bunch of pyramids, like I have one there, that will stick around for the rest of the game. So you always want to make sure to build all of your districts, because they're basically better versions of whatever one of the standard districts is for that era. So that's kind of cool. One of the things that's different from Civ is as you build districts, your city's stability will go down. And if it goes below 30 or 20 or whatever, the city will go into revolt, and it will only allow you to produce stability-related buildings. Now, you can build infrastructure that deals with that. Eventually, you will get commons quarters, which will just give you a straight-up stability bonus. And stability is pretty harsh in this game, so you're really going to want to build as many of those as possible as soon as you get them. It's kind of one of those technologies that really changes the game. So you have districts, and then you have infrastructure. And the infrastructure is kind of cool because it doesn't add to instability, but it improves existing districts and existing jobs. So that'll range from something like Playhouse that just gives a straight bonus to influence or a straight bonus to stability. But it'll also be like, once again, 10%. And for something like this, Food Plaza, it'll give a bonus to your district. So if your city has a whole bunch of industrial districts, then that can really give you a huge bonus. Otherwise, you also will have, like I said, resources. Let me just zoom out a bit. So this was kind of the scenario actually I was talking about. So in my territory, I have I think 2 uranium. I can't remember where the other uranium is, but I think I have 2 uranium. My ally here has uranium. I have no way of accessing it. And so I can't build ICBMs. I can't build satellite network. I can't build a Mars colony. Although in that case, it's oil, because I don't have access to any of those important materials. Now, it's kind of interesting how this works. So there's 2 types of things you can build on a territory. There's outposts and there's cities. So an outpost can be built by any land unit, and that claims the district for yourself, or that claims rather the province for yourself. And you can use influence. So influence is kind of the new resource in this. And influence does anything related to expansion. So you use that to build outposts, to turn outposts into cities, to annex neutral powers. It's probably the most important resource early game, but it becomes irrelevant late game. Influence will also allow you to choose civics. There is an ideological axis system in the game that shifts one way or another dependent upon the choices you make. One of my issues is it does have a bias towards liberalism. Generally speaking, the traditionalist options are not very good compared to the innovative options. So I tend to go full innovative whenever I've been playing the game. Religion exists in this, but I'm not really going to get into it because it's not particularly interesting or anything like that. So getting back into the game, so you can win the game by conquering everyone else, but how the game winner is actually decided is based on score. So there'll be objectives from era to era, which also allow you to era up. Researching certain technologies, certain events will give you fame, or I would probably call it prestige. And at the end of the game, it's whoever has the most fame that wins. So it's kind of interesting to have a score victory. instead, and it has very much encouraged me to play to the end of the game, because it can get very tight once you reach the contemporary era, because you have a lot of things like space programs and nuclear weapons that give you a ton of prestige and can turn it around if you're far behind one of the major AI players who's a conqueror. So probably the weirdest aspect of this game, so anytime you enter a new era, you get to pick a civilization that you want to be. So like in the first era, you have Egyptians, Babylonians, some Native American thing, stuff like that. And then it differs from era to era. I'm the Turks in this era. Let's see what else is there. They are currently
from one leader to another.
It doesn't say, I don't think. I don't know. We'll just it looks like it's India or something, because their appearance will change based on the civilization, based on the era. And the different civilizations, there'll be one of each type. So like for agrarian civilizations, there'll be the Celts in one era, some Native American one in another, things like that. For technology, there's the French, the Koreans, the Babylonians. I think in the modern era, it's Japan and Sweden. There is production-focused civilizations like Egypt or Germany. And any new cities you build will use the naming scheme from the current era. So I have like a bizarre mixture of Egyptian and Turkish and stuff like that. And that's just kind of something that, yeah, we have like a COD and stuff. There's also neutral civilizations who you can annex if you get enough influence and enough stuff with them. But sorry, I got completely sidetracked. Okay, so outposts claim territory and cities produce. And you attach outposts to your cities, and that just becomes part of your city's, just part of your city. You can detach them and retach them. So, for instance, in Kar here, I have three provinces attached to it, so it has full access to the resources of all these provinces, and I can build new buildings in them. I find the sweet spot tends to be about 2 additional districts, or 2 additional provinces, I mean, per province. The amount of influence it takes to attach a district is exponential, or at least quadratic, so it goes up a lot from time to time. So after, like, the first district costs virtually nothing, sorry, a province costs virtually nothing, the second one costs a lot, the third one costs an immense amount. You have a city limit, which is pretty strict, which is actually something I don't really mind. I have a really high one just because this is the end of the game. But generally speaking, it only goes up to maybe 4 once you reach the industrial age or something, depending on which civilizations you pick. The Persians give you a city cap. I don't think the actual cap is that high. Sorry, Rain just saw another cat outside, so she was kind of upset by that. She saw a rival empire. So I kind of like the lower city cap. That's something I liked about some of the later Civ games, is that you didn't build as many cities, but they were a lot bigger. It's just kind of a preference on my part, if nothing else. So there's that aspect to it. Warfare is pretty straightforward. You have armies, like any other civilization-style game. You can upgrade them. Wonders are kind of interesting because wonders are collectively built by your civilization. So if I build Christo Redeemer, for instance, let me see. I don't even remember what city I have selected. Let's go to Memphis. Christo Redeemer. I can get my other cities to participate in its construction, and it'll be constructed a lot faster. For me, given how short the time limit is in this game, wonders are generally not worth it, as the bonuses they give are not great, and it takes a really long time to build them. It doesn't seem to be that influenced by how high your empire's production is. So those are kind of the basics of Humankind. Overall, I think it's a pretty good game. If they could iron out some of the flaws, I think that would help out quite a bit. But I do give them credit for trying to do something a little bit different, for not just making a Civ clone, of taking kind of the Civ idea, putting their own spin on it, and making it kind of unique. Once again, I think there's some severe balancing issues. There's also there's quite a few malices for expanding, and it's tempting to grab as much territory as you can early game, but that can kind of screw you at the same time. Like these islands I only grabbed in the contemporary era, like not too long ago, so I would be able to, because there's a lot of resources on them. As you can see, there's a lot of oil, and I think there's uranium, yeah, on that island chain. But overall, it's not a bad game. It's not nearly as cringy as I thought it was going to be. They need to have a mode that allows for more turns, because at the moment it's capped at 600, which sounds like a lot, but really isn't. The other issue that I have is if you reach the end of the tech tree. So in most Civ games, if you complete the tech tree before the game's over, you'll get future technologies, which you can just keep researching for additional score or additional bonuses. In this game, the game just ends. But like I said, overall not a bad game. If you want to buy it, I'd say go ahead. You'll get quite a bit of enjoyment out of it. It's not really a waste of money. There's a lot of bang for your buck. If not, you can wait a little while until it goes on sale or more content gets released or something like that, which it is in dire need of. But overall, I give this game maybe like a 8 out of 10. So it gets a solid good from me. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the review. God bless, and more content to come.